I'm Cameron Franson. Today I'm going to be speaking to Daniel Socha, who is the Global Sustainability and ESG Services Lead at WSP. Daniel's chairing a roundtable event at our upcoming Chicago Summit in June on data centers, their energy demands, and associated environmental and sustainability challenges. That roundtable is going to explore how to manage these and bring technology together with environmental responsibility as the world of digital infrastructure changes. This is my conversation with Daniel. So I've seen some research out there recently saying that global power demand from data centers could nearly triple by the end of the decade compared with 2023. And a substantial portion of this growth is due to be driven by more artificial intelligence. And it's clearly significant enough that it's likely to make a very material impact on, total societal power demands. So given that, what are the specific carbon and energy supply challenges associated with data centers, given that level of expected growth, Daniel?
Yeah, and I think that's a great kind of tee up to this conversation because data centers first and foremost, access to power for that growth is fundamental. And then when we go a sub step down from that, I would say clean energy is really active driver. We have a lot of the data center developers, hyperscale tech firms right now that have very ambitious targets around decarbonization. And so it's not just power, but it's as this massive growth is happening, where do these organizations, developers find the clean power that they need? And this is really interesting too, because in some ways, this is making the discussion around clean power not just about renewables. So, for instance, WSP even has some firms and clients that we're working with that are exploring small and modular nuclear reactors as potential power sources. So I'm using the term clean energy in thinking about one of those key challenges. It's not just about renewables; those are very important, but it's the whole picture taken together of how do we drive down carbon emissions associated with the operation of data centers. Maybe another challenge that always comes to mind is location, right? Is where is a data center built? How can it rely on energy or power in that location? And then how does that intersect, broader public sentiment, regulations, and those kind of elements come into this discussion of when a company or a developer is saying, I want to build or retrofit or renovate the data center to build more capacity. How do you take together all of these various sustainability impacts when thinking about where it should be located and what stakeholders it might affect, or what stakeholders might this new project affect? So those are some of them. I mean, I could go on about this, and maybe there's actually a small sub point to mention in this, which is embodied carbon is actually one of these interesting kind of newer things that data centers are looking at, which is we know that data centers demand quite a lot of power and energy, and as you cited at the top of the call, that's expected to increase significantly. But also building new facilities has carbon associated with that. The carbon that goes into the manufacturing of cement, that goes into the manufacturing of steel for building the structures of these facilities. So for those that haven't heard of embodied carbon before, WSP is helping our clients in the data center space explore how to best measure and manage those emissions associated with the embodied carbon of a structure. And even more than that is the embodied carbon associated with the components of a data center, right? And so when we think about development more broadly, this topic of embodied carbon is becoming more and more, kind of in awareness of folks in the sustainability world. But when we think about that, often the first thing we think about is concrete and steel. However, when we think about the entire life cycle of a data center, there are components that are getting shifted in and out, different racks and updates to the components. And so WSP's life cycle assessment practitioners are working with data center developers and the hyperscalers on what are the embodied carbon impacts of the components, the IT equipment that actually is in a data center? And that's a huge challenge that we see a lot of progress and innovation being made right now. And you mentioned challenges. There's a lot of great challenges that we love to tackle at WSP, and so I'll mention one last is the speed to market. As you mentioned, there's this massive growth, and so then as developers are going out to build these new data centers or increase capacity, there's demand for components and supplies to actually build these new structures. And with that demand and that competition for the components that you need to build a data center is increasing, especially as those developers and hyperscalers are looking for sustainable options within that procurement. And so speed to market and the challenges that can build or bring to procurement is definitely something we think about. And so again, that's kind of just a longer list of when you say, what are the key challenges around making data center development sustainable? I think maybe that's kind of a summary to give here.
So WSP is very much an end-to-end provider for projects in which clients are developing infrastructure. So when you work with a client on the likes of a data center project, what are the key steps in sustainably taking the infrastructure from a concept to an operating asset, and what kind of stakeholders are involved there?
Yeah, and Cameron, I'm so glad you used the word stakeholders and brought that up as a component to all of this because the people we work with and the stakeholders that a developer and organization needs to engage with are critical in the data center development process, and especially for doing that in a sustainable way. Um, when we talk about sustainability, often the first thing that people are thinking about is low carbon solutions, the use of renewables. But you know, sustainability is much more broad than that, right? And so when thinking about how we take infrastructure from conception to operation, this involves balancing a myriad of social and environmental factors. And so this is everything from community impact and sentiment all the way to thinking about biodiversity and impacts on local water quality, those types of things, right? And so when we look at that bigger picture in guiding our clients through sustainable development of data centers, it definitely involves all kinds of stakeholder engagement. Maybe the first one that's a bit obvious here is that um, getting a data center built from conception to operation involves all of the traditional engineering processes, right? Infrastructure screenings, preliminary design work, zoning, and all of these things involve engagement with localities, regulators, utilities. And this is a huge part of what WSP does and what we bring in terms of expertise. And I think what's interesting for this conversation is to also highlight where we work even more broadly than that when we think about developing a data center and how we help our clients that are doing that work. Some of it starts at the beginning. Where does the capital come from and the investment come from to actually make these projects possible? And we notice that, there are a lot of investors and lenders very interested in the opportunities of data centers, harkening back to your mention of growth and seeing, some real opportunity to help transform the world in the AI and technology revolution. And these investors and lenders are becoming increasingly savvy about sustainability and about low carbon solutions and understanding how an organization or developer is really going to bring sustainable solutions to a project. And so a lot of our consultants and teams are working with organizations not just on the traditional engineering elements of data center development, but also working with our clients on their engagement with investors and lenders to help communicate effectively, an organization's decarbonization target or what their plans are and how those plans can actually be implemented and feasible. And so I think that's a really interesting element when we think about that far upstream of the value chain and how these organizations are getting the capital that they need. Um, and there's another huge piece of this that is maybe one of the most important pieces of all, which is the public, right? How do we work with communities and society to build these massive infrastructure projects and transform the way that we live. This is a huge issue and challenge in society because many people are learning about what a data center is for the first time. And there are sometimes negative public sentiments about the potential impacts of increased data use and AI. And people are worried about what does this increase mean for climate change and for water use. And so at WSP, we're advising our clients to engage those communities in a meaningful way. And there are some really wonderful innovations that are starting to transform the way that data centers can play a role in society and actually help mitigate negative environmental impacts. And some of these I'd love to talk about, but I don't want to keep going on and on. But heat waste recycling, and creating community spaces. If a data center is built in an urban environment, most data centers are not built in urban environments, but potentially that will shift in the future too, right? There's a little bit of, as this growth is happening, there are a lot of question marks, and WSP is really bringing together our engineers and designers along with our strategy consultants and our scientists to say, what are these broad impacts of sustainable development as we're going through this time of really step level change and growth?
Yeah, and what would you say are the main challenges where you come in as an advisor to help your clients, and what what does WSP offer that perhaps differentiates it from other firms offering similar services in the space?
Yeah, WSP is one of the largest and most technically advanced data center consultancies in the world. From our engineering and designing of these, new developments, all the way to how we help our clients manage environmental and social impact. We work all across the data center life cycle, and so whether this be with data center developers themselves, we also have teams working with the chip manufacturers and component manufacturers to think about that holistic view of the system in which a data center operates. And we bring together both that depth and that breadth, so WSP kind of has a unique differentiation in being able to work from on the ground in the technical details all the way through the different components of the life cycle. Actually, maybe an interesting example, and this is a small one because there aren't a ton of data centers doing recycled heat waste, but I think maybe this could be an interesting example that highlights how we bring together our broader expertise in infrastructure engineering. So when we think about a data center, they produce a lot of heat, right? And that heat oftentimes could just be let go into the atmosphere. However, that heat could also be used for new energy or for district heating. And so when we think about this ideal world or a hypothetical example where there was a developer building a data center in a place that is nearby an office park or nearby a community with a district heating system, in that ideal example, well, take the heat waste from that data center and recycle it into the district heating system to make sure that that energy isn't just being wasted into the atmosphere. This seems like a great idea, right? And it is happening in places, but it's incredibly complex, right? And it involves engagement not just within the data center development, but also with that local community and with the local, infrastructure that's surrounding that data center. And so WSP, we do a ton of data center design and engineering that I think is world class. WSP also brings to the table, world leading engineering across all types of infrastructure, from district heat to, the urban environment. And so I think part of our unique value proposition is that on projects or when working with clients, we can bring that expertise to bear to really create a holistic set of solutions for whatever the unique problem is or challenges are within a particular development or you know piece of sustainable infrastructure.
Yeah, and a big part of your role, it sounds like, is bringing people together and encouraging organizations to actively make their assets more sustainable, like data centers and others, I'm sure. What would you say are the drivers that are resonating the most with these organizations at the moment, and how might that change in the coming years?
Yes, and I think it's great to ask about the future. Like I said before, there are a lot of question marks and uncertainties. But traditionally we've seen investor pressure. I talked about that before as a key driver of sustainability within this kind of development in an organization. We see public sentiment, employee sentiment regulations. So there's a lot of emerging sustainability regulations, and I think that these drivers, they may ebb and flow over time, but in the long run, they will continue to be the drivers for why an organization is pursuing development in a sustainable way. And it's hard, it's definitely hard to predict, but I'm so glad that you used the word resilient in your question. It's not just about sustainability, but it's about resilience, and not just business resilience, but the resilience of society and communities. And so climate change is not just a scientific idea, it's a reality, right? Resilience is important both for the physical resilience for people and assets, but also the community and business resilience related to the low carbon economy and potential future worlds. And so, as we know, our world is warming at an unprecedented rate, and we're already seeing some of the impacts of increasing climate hazards. So, unprecedented extreme heat in New Delhi, India last summer, enormously destructive storms and hurricanes in the United States on the East Coast last fall. And the list goes on and on. We're starting to see the impacts of climate change. This is going to demand more resilience in our world. And so there's a lot of drivers, like I mentioned before, investors, public and employee sentiment, customer sentiment, that will continue to drive the need for sustainable development. But resilience and the need to be resilient is, I think, going to be one of those future drivers that continues to increase. And as those hazards increase, they're going to cause economic risks to companies and risks to communities and societies more broadly. And so WSP is thinking about, as we're helping this, kind of industry transform and move into the next stage, we're bearing that in mind, right? And we're thinking about how data centers can use resilience not just as, a lens through which to mitigate risk, but also as a potential mechanism or tool to capitalize on opportunity, right? There's the term NIMBYism that's used a lot, not in my backyard, right? It's this sentiment that communities don't want new infrastructure built in their community, not in my backyard. And so is there a potential for these new developers to use resilience and support the surrounding communities with resilience as an opportunity to make it easier to build, right? When we think about potentially there's data centers in the future that are, and I think there are some that are already doing this, that are creating spaces and surrounding landscapes designed to help the local community find a place to cool off when there's extreme heat. And so I think I'm getting very excited about this because although there's a lot of really hard realities in our future, from global warming and many other of the social and environmental impacts that are happening in the world right now, um, there's tremendous opportunity for developers to develop in a sustainable and resilient way. And WSP knows that we need to guide our clients to be thinking about how to create that long-term economic, social, and environmental value when doing this work. And makes me really proud and excited about the work that WSP is doing in this space, because we're having these conversations all day, every day with our clients, and we'll continue to do so well into the future.
Last year, WSP contributed to one of Environment Analyst Guy's on the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, the CSRD, on a chapter on double materiality. And I thought that when I saw that, I thought data centers provide quite a readily visualized example of where double materiality in sustainability reporting is valuable commercially. Can you explain what that concept is and how that might apply to a data center?
Yeah, I would be happy to. And I think it's a lot of what we've been talking about here. Yeah, and so WSP is working to help our clients undertake double materiality assessments that are driven by the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. Double materiality assessments are an assessment of how an organization has environmental and social risks and opportunities. So things like climate change, how can that create risk to my financial bottom line? So that's one half of the double. The other half of double materiality is how does my organization have positive or negative impacts on the surrounding world? And so that's society and the environment and communities. And so double materiality is really doing an assessment to look at both the financial risks and opportunities from environmental and social factors, but also the innate positive and negative impacts that an organization can have on community, society, and the environment. And so when we think about a data center, a lot of what I was saying is kind of centered around these principles, right? It's helping a data center manage the financial risks associated with climate change or biodiversity or water use. But it's also then looking at the impacts and saying, what are the impacts of building this infrastructure in a unsustainable versus a sustainable way, and then tying that all together and understanding within the Venn diagram of financial risk and opportunity and environmental and social positive and negative impact, where are there opportunities to innovate and move forward in enabling both to coexist.
So, Daniel, do you have any other examples of where WSP has worked with, a specific organization and taken them through that journey to create a holistic strategy for making their data centers more sustainable?
Yeah, and Cameron, I'm glad you asked that because one of the organizations we work with is constructing data centers all over the world and is trying to understand that across different jurisdictional regulations and different jurisdictional stakeholder needs, whether that be stakeholders in Europe versus in Asia versus in the United States. We worked recently with one organization to create a strategy for sustainability and what goals might be suited for an organization that's developing data centers all over the world. And back to your question you asked earlier about double materiality, where we started this strategy development was conducting a double materiality assessment and going out to this organization's stakeholders all the way from the very beginning of the value chain with talking to investors and lenders all the way to the end of understanding community sentiments and pulling all of that information together to say what is important from an organizational strategy level, and then within each of the jurisdictions what were the specific needs, potential risks, and opportunities with development in that site? And should that organization be collecting metrics and doing further deeper community engagement assessments in certain places based on those contextual needs?
Yeah, and what would you where do you find that these organizations specifically need the help of consultants? Because I suspect that they're often quite, technically adept companies. So where is it that you guys typically come in where in-house expertise isn't enough for them?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it really depends the clients. And so we work across all different types of developers, from those that are highly sophisticated and mature. As you mentioned, most of these developers are very technically savvy. And some of our data center, staff and experts that we have here at WSP are going out and teaching classes on data center design and innovation and helping some of the data center engineers that are in house at our clients, um, you know, learn what's the newest and latest and greatest thinking in data center design and engineering. But like you said, I mean, maybe there are some other places where we're working with a less mature organization to help bring our expertise into their initial strategy and planning, or if it's a developer that is, starting from scratch, I think having a consultant come in and help them understand the broader landscape and bring that broader experience really helps them build the in-house capabilities to understand where to start. And so maybe there's a little bit of a two pieces to your answer. One is to help those that are technically sophisticated and mature get deeper and stay apprised of the latest trends, and also helping those that are starting or refining, um, you know build the foundational blocks from a much broader view that we can bring as a consultancy than maybe one organization would otherwise have.
Thank you for listening to our conversation today. We're looking forward to Daniel's roundtable on this topic and many others at the Sustainability Delivery Summit in Chicago, taking place between the 9th and 11th of June. We hope to see you there.